My name's Colleen, and I'm an educator at the St. Louis Art Museum. Welcome to Wednesday. Today, we're going to be learning about an artist named Diego Rivera. We'll learn about his life and his artwork. We'll start by reading a story together, then we'll be looking at some art from the museum's collection, and we'll end by making our own art together. Feel free to pause the video at any time if you'd like to get a closer look, if you'd like to talk about something with the people that you're with, or if you need to gather some art supplies. Are you ready? Let's get started. Today, we're going to be reading a story called Diego Rivera, His World and Ours. If you've joined me for Wee Wednesday before, you may know that when I read a new book, I like to take a look at the cover to see if I can find out some things about the story before I read. Let's take a look at this cover together. What do you notice? I see a few different clues on this cover. The first thing I notice is this person here in the center. And it looks like they have some tools in their hands. So I see a paintbrush and a palette with some paint on it. So I'm thinking maybe they're making some art. Then I notice all these other people around them. So I see people playing with a dog, someone running with a backpack, maybe they're on their way to school. Then I see some other people that have different kinds of clothes that I'm not familiar with. Looks like they're playing instruments, carrying things on their back. What do you think the story might be about based on what we can see? Let's find out. Diego Rivera, His World and Ours by Duncan Tonatiuh. Diego Rivera was born in Mexico in a city called Guanajuato, which means the land of frogs. As a boy, Diego enjoyed playing with his trains, but more than anything, he liked to draw. What do you like to do more than anything? Diego loved drawing so much that when he was a young man, he sailed on a ship across the ocean. He went to the city of Madrid in Spain to study art under the direction of a well-known painter. There he learned the classical way to paint, which means his finished paintings looked very realistic, almost like photographs. After his studies, Diego went to Paris, the capital of France. There, he met young artists who were painting in new and exciting ways. He experimented with these new methods of painting himself. One method was called cubism, in which the painting did not exactly resemble its subject, but was composed of geometric shapes, such as squares, circles, and triangles. One day, a politician named Jose Vasconcelos urged Diego to return to Mexico. He wanted Diego and other artists to paint murals around the city about the Mexican people's history and customs. Diego was thrilled by this new project. When he returned to his homeland, Diego traveled through its deserts, mountains, and jungles. He wanted to be inspired by his country. He met people who worked the land, and he visited the ruins of ancient Mexican civilizations, like those of the Aztecs and the Maya. Diego was full of ideas after his trips. With the help of friends and apprentices, he began to paint murals on large walls so that everyone in his country, rich and poor, young and old, could see and learn from them. Diego was given a really big job to do, and it looks like he needed the help of many people to get the job done. Have you ever had a really big job to do and you needed other people's help to do it? How did it feel to get that big job done with others helping you? his murals, Diego combined the classical way of painting he had learned as a young man and the new styles of art he had experimented with abroad. But he merged them with the simple yet elegant forms of ancient Mexican art that he had grown passionate for after his travels. It looks like Diego's working on one of his murals here. Sometimes, when I'm reading a story, I like to predict what's going to happen on the next page. What do you think we might see next, based on what we've already read? Let's see. On the walls of an important government building, Diego painted the history of his country. He painted the struggle of the Mexican people to break free from the Spanish king. He also painted the fight that took place many years later when farmers and workers defended themselves against greedy men who were taking advantage of them. Have you ever seen a mural in your community or your city? How did it feel to see a work of art that was so big? Diego painted his country's dances and traditions, such as La Zandunga, a love dance from the coastal area, and the dance of Los Listones, a ribbon dance from the south. He wanted to celebrate the things that were special to Mexico and wanted Mexicans from all distant parts of the land to learn about their culture and feel proud. Diego lived to be an old man. By the time he passed away, he had created many wonderful artworks and was celebrated by the people in Mexico as well as around the world. But if he were alive today, what would he paint? Would he paint the way we dress and live? Would he paint the way we play? Would he paint the big city? As he painted the ancient Aztec city of Tenochtitlan? Or would he paint students at their desks, just as he painted factory workers in the production line? How do you think Diego Rivera might paint where you live, work, and play? Maybe Diego would paint shops at the mall, as he painted the street vendors selling flores. Or would he paint the luchadores, wrestling in their costumes? Just as he painted the Aztec warriors fighting the invading soldiers, the Spanish conquistadores? Would Diego paint our craze for monsters and creatures from outer space, as he painted the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent? Diego's murals teach us about the past, but they also show a better future for common people. Diego imagined everyone, men and women, boys and girls of all ages and nationalities, living together and caring for one another. Today, Diego is not around to make this happen, so it is up to us to make our own murals and bring them to life. The end. I invite you to think about your favorite part of the story and talk about that with the people that you're with. We're going to travel to the museum now to look at some works of art. Let's imagine how we might get there. Since we're learning about Diego Rivera today, let's imagine taking our journey with him. How might you get to the museum with a friend you're just getting to know? Maybe you'll take a long walk and you'll look at some of his murals along the way. Or maybe you'll take a really big ship, like the one he might have taken on his long journey to Europe. Or maybe you'll talk about it together and you'll decide. You decide. Once you've decided, if you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself going. Whew, that was a really exciting journey today with Diego Rivera. I'm really glad that we made it. In order to get ready to look at our works of art, we're going to be doing an experience I'm calling Ask the Artist. We've already learned a lot about Diego Rivera from the story that we read, but there's so much more to discover. How do you get to know a new friend? You talk to them and you ask them questions. Since we can't talk to Diego Rivera in real life, we're going to imagine what it might be like if we could sit down and ask him some questions. So if you'd like, you can get a grown-up to help you to write down your questions. I have a notebook and a pen here to write down my questions. And we're going to be doing some of our best thinking while we're thinking about these questions. So I'm going to use a thinking cap to help me do that. So you can grab any hat that you might have around your home to be your thinking cap, or you can make one. I made one out of newspaper. And if you'd like to make a newspaper hat, there's some instructions in the resource guide. So put on your thinking caps, have your grown-up ready with your notebook and your pen or pencil. And in order to do some of my best thinking, I need to be relaxed. And a way that I like to relax is to breathe deeply. So if you'd like, we're going to get into a comfortable position. Join me by breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Let's try that one more time. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Now, what would you like to ask Diego Rivera? What have we already learned about him? What else would you like to know? What would you like to learn more about? I think a question I might ask Diego Rivera is, what did you like to do with your friends when you were a kid? Thinking. I think another question I might ask him is, how did it feel to travel so far away from home when you were young? For my last question, from what we learned in the story, it sounds like you made many murals throughout your life. Do you have a favorite mural, and where is it located? So, think of any final questions that you might have for Diego Rivera. And in order to find out some of the answers, we might be able to do some research with our grown-ups. So you can look at books from the library, or you can do some research on the internet. Now to end, let's take one more deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouth. You can take off those thinking caps. I feel much more ready to look at some really amazing works of art. We're going to look at some works of art from the museum's collection together. If you'd like, you can scroll down on the page to get a closer look at the images we'll be viewing. Feel free to pause the video at any time to do this. Take a close look at this work of art. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can we find? This is a drawing by Diego Rivera. It's called Yucatan Woman Waiting While Maize is Ground. This drawing was part of a book that included many drawings by Diego Rivera of scenes of daily life in small Mexican villages. This drawing shows a woman holding a child, waiting for someone to grind her maize in a machine. Maize is another word for corn. Once maize is ground, it can be cooked and used in many different ways. Based on what we can see, what do you imagine might happen next? Let's see how Diego Rivera created another work of art showing scenes from everyday life. Look carefully at this work of art. What do you see? Let's zoom in to get a closer look. What new details can you see now? This is a watercolor painting by Diego Rivera. It's called Group at Market. It shows a group of people at a market. What do you notice about their body language and facial expressions? What do you imagine they might be saying to each other based on what we can see? Diego Rivera created artwork that celebrated scenes of everyday life in his home country of Mexico. If you could create a work of art based on an everyday scene in your community, like Diego Rivera, which people or places would you choose to highlight? If you'd like, you can talk about your ideas with the people that you're with. Now that we looked at some art together, let's travel back home so we can make our own art. So grab your new friend Diego Rivera and take a look at his murals on your walk, or get in that big ship, or decide together, and let's head home. For our art making project today, we are going to be making our own watercolor paintings. We've been learning about Diego Rivera and his life and his art and what inspired him. We've seen that he was inspired by everyday people doing everyday things, so we're going to create our own watercolor painting of an everyday scene in our community. We're going to need a few different materials for our project today. We're going to need a piece of paper. It doesn't matter what kind of paper you have. If you have thick paper, I would recommend using the thickest paper that you can find at home. We're also going to need a paintbrush. We're going to be using watercolor paints today. If you don't have a paintbrush, you can also use a sponge. And we're going to need some crayons because we're going to be doing a special technique today with crayons. So any kind of crayons you have at home will work. If you have a white crayon, that might be a fun thing to have, but you definitely don't need a white crayon. We're going to need a cup of water to rinse our brush in between colors, and then we're going to need some watercolor paints. So if you'd like, you can use paints that you bought at the store, or you can also make your own watercolor paints. So you can make them really easily with some stuff that you have in your kitchen. So if you have food coloring, this is a really easy way to make watercolor paints. I already mixed this one earlier. So any kind of plastic cups or glasses that you have that you want to use, just put a little bit of water in them. And then you take your food coloring and just put a drop. And the more drops you put in, the darker your color will be. And you really don't need a lot. So usually just a couple drops is all that you need. So I've got my red and my kind of orangey yellow color. So I take my paintbrush and mix it, and you can see them turning into those beautiful watercolor paints. So I'll rinse my brush here. And if you have a paper towel, that's another nice thing to have, or a rag, so you can kind of dry off your brush in between painting. And then I have my orangey yellow color. Now if you don't have food coloring at home, another way that you can make watercolor paints is by using dried out markers. So if you have markers at your home that aren't really working that well anymore, you can actually recycle them and make them into watercolor paints, which I think is so cool. So you take your dried out markers, you take off the caps, put them in a cup of water, and this has been sitting like this for a couple hours, so sometimes it can take a little bit of time. So this might be a great thing to do the day before you decide you're going to paint. And then you take your markers out, and I have a bunch of markers, and so I used all green so I could get a really nice green color, but you could experiment by mixing colors to see what color you get. Take out your markers, and then you're left with this wonderful watercolor paint. So that can be a really great way to use up something that's was going to be thrown away and turn it into another art material. So now I have all of my materials ready and I'm ready to do some painting. So before we start painting, we're actually going to use a technique today called resist. And what that means is we're going to draw with our crayons first, and then we're going to paint on top of that later. And what's going to happen is wherever we draw with our crayon, the paint won't adhere or won't attach to the paper. So you can color with colored crayons on white paper if you're using white paper, or you can color with white crayons, and then we'll see the lines that we do magically appear kind of later. So I'm going to show you how to do both of those. So to start, we're going to have to think about what are we going to draw. So we've been talking about Diego Rivera and how he made scenes of everyday people doing everyday things. So I was thinking about something that's in my community that lots of people enjoy and go to, and that's a farmer's market. So farmers bring their produce and their food and they sell it to people in the community. So I thought I would make a scene of my farmer's market. So I'm going to use a combination of colored crayons and white crayons. So here's my stand for my market. They usually have a tent because it's often sunny outside. And you can think about lots of different things in your community that you might want to make a scene of. Your school, your neighborhood, your park, playground, community center. There are so many things in your community that you can highlight, just like Diego Rivera did. So I think now I need the farmer that I buy my produce from. So I'm going to finish drawing the rest of my scene here. Okay, so I drew lots of things with my colored crayons. I have my farmer with a stand who's going to sell me produce. I have some trees because it usually takes place in my community park. And now I'm actually going to use my white crayons to draw some of the produce in the boxes here, which is where they sell their food. So you're not going to be able to see it on the camera, but we'll be able to see it once we add the paint. So I'm going to add some of those details in the boxes and then we'll see them show up later. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my paint. So I know that you're really interested to see what happens in those spots that I use the white crayons, so let me show you those first. So I'm going to use some of my blue paint here. And if you see when I go over, you can see the produce in the boxes now. So see how the crayon is resisting the water? And that's what a resist technique is. And there's my lettuce. And my other produce here. So now I'm going to go ahead and add some other colors with my paintbrush. Okay, so I've added lots of different colors to my painting, and you can see how you can still see all of my crayon lines because they resisted the watercolor paints. And I used my watercolor paints with food coloring, I used my watercolor paints for my dried out markers, and now I have my community scene in a watercolor painting. Thank you for joining me today here at Wee Wednesday. We hope you had fun. I wanted to show you another example of a watercolor painting that I made. So this is the one that we made together. This is my farmer's market painting that I made using different colored crayons, and I used those white crayons and that resist technique that we talked about. I also made another painting, this time of a playground in my community, but for this one I only used my white crayon, so you can see all those lines that resisted the paint with my watercolors. We would love to see your watercolor paintings of your community scenes. You can share them with us on social media and use the hashtag STLArtMuseum and We Wednesday. We hope to see you next time. Keep on creating. Bye.